On.
He's very good. All set now.
No, that's not yours. You don't use that one. That's his. We have then we are on Yud Dalet Amud Aleph.
All right.
That's the new Mishnah. Here, this is yours. And here, let me find for you. We're at new parak.
New parak.
Beginning of the third parak. Malbeinu Satvua. Parak in Malacha Aleph. Okay? So it should be easy for a couple of blot. As I said, we can finish theoretically in 10 minutes tonight.
What?
Just kidding. Not much longer.
I can barely follow you reading this book anyway. Go ahead.
Oh, the Yerushalmi are much slower than in the morning. Malbeinu Satvua shebein hazeisim. I think so. Malbeinu Satvua shebein hazeisim. You have squares of grain growing among olive trees. Yerushalmi Peah mikol achas v'achas. Yerushalmi says each square of grain gets its own individual peah. Uvesil says you can take from one location and all the rest of the locations, no problem. Everybody concedes that if the various different squares of grain curved around the trees and interconnected, then shunosim peachas, and you can give one pair from all of the squares of grain from one of the squares. You treat your field like a leopard. In other words, you harvest some parts of it and leave other parts of it for later. V'shir klachim lachim, meaning that you leave the moist, which means unripe, stalks for later on. Akiva says, from each and every one of the clumps of stalks which you leave out in the field, you give its own individual peah. It says, no, they're still considered to be all part and parcel of the same harvest, and you give from one location on the entire field. Chachamim concede to Rabbi Akiva, when you plant sheves, which is some type of herb, or mustard seed in 3 different places in your field, you give peah from each and every section. We learned in our Mishnah, says the Gemara, that the grain is growing among the olive trees. The Tanya of the base Rebbe, we learned in the Brisa, which was said in the house of Rebbe, Shebein Ilonos. There they said it's talking about grain which is growing not among olive trees, but among fruit trees. Now, olive trees are chayiv in peah, fruit trees are not, because olive trees, you take the olive oil and you preserve it for a long time. That's called machnisa l'kiyum. Fruit trees, you can't take oranges and preserve them. They didn't have refrigeration in the old days, right? So you can't preserve the product. So therefore, ilanos are exempt from peah. Okay, so Masnisa Tzurchel debates Rebbe. Our Mishnah needs to have Rebbe's statement independent of it as a hashlama in order to complete the picture, and vice versa as well. Debates Rebbe Tzurchel Masnisin. Rebbe's Brisa requires our Mishnah as well. Ilutzina Masnisim V'lotzina the base Rebbe. Where we just have learned our Mishnah, not have learned the Brisa which was stated in the house of Rebbe. Havina Amrina, we would have said Lo Amar El Sheben Azeitim. Where did we say that you have to give, according to Beis Shammai, the peah from each and every block of grain, from each and every square of grain, where they're growing among the olive trees, and olive trees have their own independent chiyuv of peah, so therefore they're considered to be interruptions in the grain grain field, right? Because they are an independent chiyuv, each one of them. So I would have thought avol, that's where you should chayv peah to give peah on each one. But if what's growing between the grain patches is something which is exempt from peah, I might look at it as being neutral and not an interruption. I might say in that case, even maybe even Beis Shammai agrees that they're still interconnected, and therefore I can get peah from one square of grain and all the squares of grain. And vice versa. That tells us why we needed to have the price of Rebbe that teaches us that Beis Shammai Beis Machlokas is even where the trees in between are exempt from peah. Even there, Beis Shammai holds that those trees are an interrupting factor, and each square of grain has to have its own peah.
This is the concept we had previously about something that's neutral between...
Right. I might say that neutral is not interruption. That's the chiddush, that neutral is an interruption.
So why is this is there some chiddush here, or is it just a...
It's a repeat. Let's repeat. Okay, Abi Tuch Beis Rebbe. Oh, and vice versa here. Or we look time the Beis Rebbe where we just didn't learn Rebbe's Brisa Lo Tanina Masnisa not Lo Mishnah. Havina Namri we would have said Lo Manra Shavena Lonas. When do I say that Beis Hillel holds that they're all interconnected? When between the squares of grain, all you have is Ilanos, trees, orchards. Davershu Peter Peah, which is exempt from Peah. Davershu Chaya Peah, but were there to be olives between the squares of grain, which is Chaya Peah. Abisil Moim Shenas in Peah Mikolachas Vachas. I might say even Beis Hillel concedes you have to compare from each one of the squares independently. Have a tzurcha lemas nisin. That's why I need both the Mishnah utzurcha Rebbe, and I need both the Beis Rebbe. I need the Brisa of the house of Rebbe as well. Okay, is that easy? The whole Gemara is like that tonight. Okay, says the Gemara.
So with the olives
are chayv and peah, trees are not. Olive, but they're both interruptions.
So the apples on the trees.
Apples are exempt from peah. Okay?
And how about the, what do you call it?
Anything which you cannot store for a long
Grapes
time.
And all that.
Grapes you can, you make wine out of it.
Yeah.
Grapes you can. Okay? Dates you can.
Figs and that also.
No. Figs no. Dates yes. Yeah, because figs you can't store for a long time.
Dry figs.
Yeah. They did, but they didn't dry them efficiently, it seems. It seems only dates dried efficiently.
Oh.
Okay? In any event, it says more further. V'ilu still doesn't help. No, a little bit further than that. Manan Kayamin. What are we talking about? Okay, those who have the Vilna Gemaras, it's 7 lines from the end of the 7 lines from the end of the narrow lines. You have it, Manan Kayamin? Manan Kayamin. Manan Kayamin. Imruvach, what are you talking about? If the trees are broadly spaced apart, but even Beisham agrees that you give pay from all the squares together, all the squares are great together. If we're talking about where the trees are spaced closely together, also Beis Hillel concedes you have to give pay from each individual square. We're talking about a case where there are 10 planted per base seah, which is a standard planting distance when you come to plant saplings. So Beis Shammai uvdi longer tzuvim. Beis Shammai makes them, in other words, considers them as if they are continuous and interrupt each one of the squares. Beis Hillel considers them as if they are broken up and therefore the squares are interconnected. My time to Beis Shammai, what's like to Beis Shammai? Shein derech miyadim liyos machtis ben Ezroi. He must be, his logic is that one doesn't normally place seeds between the trees. If one finds grain between the trees, they're obviously considered to be aberrant. It's not a grain field, but little patches of grain, each of which requires its own pail. Okay. You know, if that's the case, says Gemara, Asi the Beis Shammai Svore is Rabbi Yossi, is like Rabbi Svore, which we'll learn later. Kimad Rabbi Yossi, just like Rabbi Yossi said, Ein derech miyodam lios machlisim betzolim bein min hayeh bein hayerek. Rabbi Yossi said, people don't normally plant onions among their vegetables. So to Beis Shammai says you don't normally place grain among your trees. Mistabra, however, it makes sense to say Beis Shammai Yodu Rabbi Yossi. Beis Shammai will concede to Rabbi Yossi because it's certainly rarer to find onions and vegetables mixed together than it is to find grain and trees mixed together. However, Rabbi Yossi lo yed Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yossi does not necessarily admit to Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai yodu Rabbi Yossi. Beis Shammai admits Rabbi Yossi shein derech miyodam lios machnisim betzolim bein hayerek, that you don't normally find people putting onions among their vegetables. Rabbi Yossi lo yoda lo Beis Shammai. One can see the Beis Shammai shein derech miyodam lios machnisim zroim bein lanos. Sometimes to put grain among their trees. Okay. Now, the Gemara brings down a series of questions which Gemara does not resolve. What about Hoya Sham? Now, here the Ridbaz brings down from the Grod. There's a typo here. Hoya Sham, Elon can mean Shu Goder. If there was a tree thick as a fence, in other words, 4 amos wide, what's the halach in that case?
It says Geder
Kamishu Elon. Right, that's what it says in our Gemara as well. Right, but it's the Grod is a typo. What if there's a tree? A tree as thick as broad as a fence? Is that an interruption according to even Beis Hillel? And the Gemara doesn't resolve it. The Gemara leaves it open. Next question. Ad Kedom B'Muravi Mikan. Our mission is talking about where the Rosh Hashuras wrap around the trees and the squares meet on each side of the tree. What about Harei Muravi Mitzad Echad? What about if they only wrap around the tree on one side but not on the other side? In other words, the squares of grain don't meet on both sides of the tree but only on one side of that. Are they still considered according to Beis Hillel to be connected? Next question. How broad a connection do you have to have? Obishlosha tolamim shalop siach. Is it when they're connected even specifically by 3 furrows breadth, which is the shiur which you saw previously? Or afilu kosher, he's in a thinnest thread connection between the squares of grain. Is that sufficient to make sure they're all connected and take pay from one side off the entire field? None of these questions are resolved. Left open, left difficult. Haminamer. Getting back to our mission, we said that some people who cut their fields as if they were leopards. What does it mean, leopards? What's salient about a leopard? It's got spots. Claws. Spots. So, Kahade, that was creative. Haminamer. You take claws. You take your fingernails and you cut it like that. Haminamer. Kahade Nimra, like a leopard. That it has spots. Why does it have spots? Because Mokum Azvoni, the place that's fertilized, only in Tchila. That's where it grows first, right? Because the place that's fertilized goes quicker. So that's why we have clumps which grow quicker than other places. That's why Nimrada correlates called the leopard, right? It has spots. Now, our mission is talking about where there was dry grain on all sides, and in the middle there was lach, there was moist grain. Now moist grain is not ripe. Dry grain is ripe. Okay? So when there's moist grain, when there's dry grain in the middle, so that is immediately harvestable, and then that leaves all sorts of clumps of moist grain all over for later on. So now we have machlokas in our Mishnah. Do you have to take payoff from each one of the clumps of moist grain on its own? Right, later on or not?
Since the calendar year of the harvest is the same, when you just say that
you would have said that, but our sukkah clearly doesn't hold that way. Yeah, it doesn't work by year.
It's not like an esrog.
Right, it's not by fiscal year. It has to be the same, not only the same harvest period, but the same period within the harvest period. We're going to see countless other cases like that, and not countless, several other cases like that this evening. It has to be not just the same year, it has to be the same general period.
Didn't we have something earlier that didn't say that it said?
Well, we did, but that's where it's not staggered but continuous over time. Where it's staggered, it's punctuated in terms of the pay. Look, it's machlokas here. Not everybody agrees, but that's the concept here. Now, what about the other case? I'm sorry. I apologize. Our Mishnah where there's a machlokas is where there's Yavesh Mikan Mikan. I reversed the case. I apologize. Our Mishnah is where Yavesh Mikan there was dry all over the place that you harvested first. The lach ba'emtza, and it was moist in the middle. What about lach Mikan Mikan? The moist grain, which is not yet ripe, was all over the place. The Yavesh ba'emtza, and the dry grain was in the middle. So what about in that case? In that case, we'd all agree that you have to give 2 different payos. Why? Because in that case, we might concede that since the yavish is in the middle, right? Since the yavish is in the middle, and the dry and the moist grain is therefore scattered as a result, so therefore when you harvest the yavish, the moist grain is not yet suitable. When you come later on to harvest the moist, so one is over here, one is over there. How can you pay it from one on the other? maybe in that case, taka, they're separate, and you have to give payos independently on all the new grain, which you're harvesting 2 or 3 weeks later, whenever the period comes.
That's what you consider the middle now, which is just harvested land. Is that
Right.
hefsek?
It seems to be a hefsek, not because it's harvested land, not because it's fallow land, but because at the time that it grew, these are considered to be 2 minim. Those which come up speedier and those which come up slower are distinct. And that's what the Gemara is about to say. Says the Gemara, let's look at it right now. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Bon, Rabbi Chia, Bosem Shem Rabbi Yochanan, Asid Rabbi Meir, Hel Kushitas Rabbi Kiva Rabbo, like Rabbi Kiva's Rebbe. Kemod Rabbi Kiva Amar Lach v'Yavish Shnei Minim Heim. See that? The stuff which grows quicker, the dry, which is now dry, and the stuff which goes slower, which is still moist, they're 2 separate meanings. And therefore, if you lach here and lach there, and yavish in the middle, everybody agrees the lach and lach on the 2 sides are separate. You have to get pay one from there and pay one from there. Right? Well, it's 2 minim, but the min in the middle is a separation between the. As if you have 3 fields. 3 fields. Okay, so it says the Gemara. Amrei Chavaykum Rabbi Yossi. So the Chaverim said in front of Yossi, V'lam leik Rabbi Akiva. Why do you have to say it's Tafko and Rabbi Akiva? I feel like Rabbanim, even true Kohen Rabbanim. So it's Tzniya, we learned later in our Perek. Hamach, we're going to have it in a few minutes. Hamachlik b'tzoyim l'shuk. If somebody's dividing up his onions, some of these he's putting aside. Well, not putting aside, but he's separating those onions which are going to go immediately to the market. And he's keeping the dry ones to make a silo or barn out of them. They're 2 separate meaning. Rabbi Yossi said, "Shamina shok v'garin shnei minim." So they're 2 separate meaning. So says the Gemara, lichor, that's the same thing as lach and yavish. So the Gemara says no. Rabbi Yossi. This is a refutation. Rabbi Yossi says, Shamina, we've heard, Shuk v'goren shnei minim heim. Those onions which go to market and those which go into storage, those are 2 minim. However, lach v'yavish shnei minim heim. You think lach and yavish are 2 minim? They're not 2 minim. Lach and yavish are the same min, and therefore, chatzi lach v'chatzi yavish. If you have half your field dry and half your field moist, af Rabbi Akiva moida, even Rabbi Akiva can concede that you can give payah from one on the whole thing. So it seems to be arguing on on what we just said previously. Before we said Rabbi Akiva says lach v'yavish nei minim. You were saying it's not necessarily so. We're saying the lach v'yavish are 1 min, and that, like you were saying before, even though the one takes several weeks later than the other, nonetheless it's considered to be all 1 field vis-a-vis the halacha peah. You can leave field from the lach on the yavish.
It's interesting because it doesn't mention a makor for where you see Rabbi Kiva says that it's shnei minim.
Right, it's seen before, well, which is perhaps why the Gemara can renege on the deal. Because previously the Gemara didn't bring a source, it just made an assumption. Why the Gemara made such an assumption, I don't know. But now it seems that clearly the Gemara is reneging on it. So now the V'hot Ninon, according to Pnei Moshe, is a continuation of this sugya. But according to Ridbaz, we take out the word V'hot Ninon, and then it reads much better. Well, the Ridbaz, the name of the Gra, takes out the word V'hot Ninon. Do you have the word V'hot Ninon in yours? Okay, so but
Comma after moda, not a
yeah, which is the way Pnei Moshe reads. V'hot Ninon is going to be a proof of what we just said, that lach and yavish are the same min. But that's the way the Pnei Moshe learns. But we'll learn like the Ridbaz right now. There's not a proof of rather separate statements. We learned in our Mishnah, Modim Chachomim Rabbi Akiva. The Chachomim can see the Rabbi Akiva, B'zorei sheves or chardo, when one plants sheves, some sort of seed, herb, and chardo, and mustard, b'shloshim makomos, in 3 fields in one's field, 3 places in one field, in 3 patches in one's field, so that one gives pay from each and every patch. So the Kini Mas Nisan. This is the way to read our Mishnah, just so you shouldn't make a mistake, a klutzy mistake. Don't think that don't think it's 3 places altogether, 2 of Shevis and 1 of Chardo, or one of Shevis and 2 of Chardo. No, Kinimas, this is the way to read our Mishnah. Shevis b'shloshim makomos. You have Shevis in 3 places. or Chayda b'shlosha mekomos. Now, why in those cases do we say it's different? So Shmuel Ma'avnesha ein aroshim rishon mamtin lachrun. They grow at different rates. The mustard seed, some it goes quicker and some it grows slower. So therefore each patch gets separate. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yochanan said, "Nation darkenly zora urugas urubas." Not because they grow at different rates, but rather because they are planted in various different patches. That's their nature. So therefore each patch is distinct. Says Maldaiti the Shmuel Corner Shmuel says they mature at various different rates. So then, you have to give pay on each stalk from its own stalk. Because since they're maturing at different rates, so each stalk has its own maturity date. And when it has its maturity date, that's when you have to give pay from it. I think it's an exaggeration. I think it means you have to monitor which date is which date. But the point is that you have to give pay a much smaller field, portions of your field, because you have to look at how they're staggered and how they grow to maturity. Al-Daiti, Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, says that the reason why we take from each patch independently is because each patch is considered to be the derech, and therefore each one is separate. So Marvish called Aruga Aruga, you can separate from each Aruga distinctly. Okay? Not from each stalk, I should say, but from each aruga, because each aruga is its own unit and it has its own common identity. Yes.
So Shmuel's saying, in effect, you have to take there's a mitzvah pay on each separate harvest.
On each separate harvest, and that can even be each separate stalk, which is a shocking thing, right?
What's not explained here is what constitutes a harvest. Is it
one stalk?
No, but
like we learned at the beginning of the session.
You're harvesting day one. And then you stop day two, but you continue.
Oh, yeah, that's not explained here. I don't know if it's never explained. Maybe it'll be explained later, but you're right. It's not explained here what the demarcation point of one harvest is. Yes, granted that it is not explained here. Okay. Hamachlik b'tzayim lachan l'shuk. This is, again, according to Moshe, I don't want to get it, and according to the Rashi Shiur Leo as well, it seems, this is actually a proof to what we were saying previously, but let's not get into that right now. I will learn it's a separate comment on our Mishnah. Hamachli b'tzayim lachan l'shuk. You're separating. You're leaving your moist onions for the marketplace. And you are keeping your dry ones for making a silo. No you pay independently here. Now here everybody agrees these are like two meaning. And you have to give two separate types to two separate payers. The Chaim Bafuna saying is true by peace. The Chaim Bafuna so Hamedon, so too on a grape orchard which is growing on trellises. Oh, wait a minute. No sepile also Chaim Bafuna. The Chaim Beker. Sepile also. The Chaim Beker. Wait, there's a punctuation here which I forgot. Oh, B'chein B'kerem, thank you. Okay, and so too by a vineyard. That they're two separate payers.
And Afuna, what is Afuna?
Afuna is peas. The modern Hebrew also. Afuna, yeah. Peas, yeah. Like peas and carrots. That's the peas. The gezer is the carrots. Okay, so Hamedo, right? New state statement. Thank you. Hamedo no simin amashua mashashir. The Hamedo is somebody who is he's it's not pruning. He planted his vineyard too thick with too many trees. So now he removes trees from the vineyard. That's called medo. It's like medaldel, to make it leaner, to make it trimmer. So therefore he's trimming his vineyard by removing trees which are excess. So nonetheless, that's not considered to be two separate harvests. He gives him what he left on the entire oh no, it is two separate harvests, right? Now let's say he takes out 10 grapevines and leaves 10. So he gives him the 10 he's taking out now, he has to leave from them peah, and on the 10 he left, he has to leave from them peah. So we are made when you are thinning out your vineyard, then you have to leave two payers. One for when you thin out, and one for when you do the full harvest later on.
It's assuming that there are grapes that are ready for harvest.
Right, assuming the grapes are ready to harvest, right.
Usually you would do that off season.
Right, so it seems here they did it even after grapes actually grew on the tree. That's correct. Okay, seems they would actually be able to use those grapes for something. Okay, well, if you happen to have harvested one side of your field, so you can still give me Namashra call you. That's the fact that you harvested one side doesn't require you to give pay on that one side. You can give from what's left on the entire field, including that one side. Tani, we learned Hamerig. Merig is the same thing we're talking about in our Mishnah, where you separate the onions. Merig is to separate. Chayev b'tchil also. He's chayev at the beginning, and chayev. Chayev b'tchil also, chayev b'sof. He's chayev to give from the stuff at the beginning. Chayev to give from the end. In other words, each. Maybe make a mistake on Merig. Just let me check.
Rita, her from Rita.
Oh, the more it's going to explain. Okay. Hamer chayv tchus chayv sof. He has to give pay at the beginning, he has to give pay at the end. Ve'ei deino meruk. What is this meruk? Rabbi Yehuda said, like we learned in our Mishnah, Hamachli b'tzolim, somebody who separates his onions lashuk. He's setting aside some of the market now. U'makayim v'eshel garden is keeping the dry ones for his barn, for the silo. So Rabbi Yehuda, so in this case, he has to give pay up from both types. From the type which he's selling right now fresh, and from the type which he's keeping to dry. Rabbi Yosef said, Hodein kitzcha, very interesting thing. A kitzcha is an onion seed. I don't know what an onion seed looks like. I thought they grew in bulbs. But I guess, I don't know. But you take an onion seed, Hodein kitzcha, you take an onion seed, Kadzora law, when you plant it, Ravi Batzaltakika makes a small onion. Kadachosa, when you plant the bulb, which grew now, or its first seed, and then bulbs, then you plant the bulb, Ravi Batzal Rav, he makes a big onion. So the chiddush is that when you plant in this two-stage process, you have to give payah from each stage on its own stage. In other words, on the first onions, which are harvested as now small bulbs, you have to give payah. Then when you plant them later on and get larger onions, you have to give payah again. Okay? So it says the Gemara, the low cane, ma'anon ra'amidan. So, the low cane means, had we not said this, Man on Armia, what would we have said differently? In other words, what's the chiddush now what you're saying, Rabbi Yossi, about kitzcha? Of course, the two harvests. There's one harvest of the small bulbs and the harvest of the big onions. So of course we would do this. So it says the Gemara, again, the low cane, would you not have told me this? Man on Armia, what would we have said otherwise? Big chacham, you're telling me a chiddush? I would have known this is obvious. So it's when I tell you what he would have said otherwise. Would have said, Hoyavulis Ria. Since the first small bulbs are meant for replanting, so I might say, Yeh potter minat peah. I might say you're exempt from peah, because it's made for replanting anyway. Okay. Nonetheless, you're not exempt, because they are edible. Says the Gemara, V'chitin lo lizriya hein. Ask the Gemara, I don't understand. What's the Havamina? When you harvest wheat, even if you tend to replant the wheat which you harvest is chayv and peah, right? So here too, the first bulbs would be chayv and peah. So Ismar, that's not a good answer.
Well, that's the assumption that the chita is replanted.
Right. That's why the Gemara rejects it. The Gemara says the chitin lo lezriya. Ask the Gemara, chitin lo lezriya. So Ismar, no. Chitin ruban la'achila. By chitin, most of them are made to eat. That's why the first harvesting is chayv and peah. Hi, some that you put back in the ground, but that's a minuscule amount. Obviously, go after the roof. Here, on the count, it's a very big chiddush, but Rabbi Yossi is saying about kitzcha, because here, of the onions, The overwhelming majority of the onions are put back in the ground. Very few of those small bulbs the first small bulbs are eaten. So therefore it's a big chiddush to say that step is chayv and peah. Okay? Says the Gemara, I dated Rabbi Yirmiyah, according to Rabbi Yirmiyah's opinion, that a merig is a machlik b'tzolim. So yerek chayev b'peah. We see that he holds that yerek, the vegetables, are a chayev and peah. Why is that? Which is me? Right, but the thing is, even the moist ones are chayev and peah. The ones which went to the shuk, they're not dried. So the answer is obvious to what you're answering. Mino machniso l'kiyum, because some of them you put into kiyum, right? The dry ones, you can dry onions and keep them. Even though fresh onions won't keep, but since they're part of the totality of a botanical category which can be kept, can be preserved, therefore they're all chayiv and peah. Okay? Ma'avi le Rabbi Yossi. What does Rabbi Yossi say about? However, what does Rabbi Yossi say now? Bear in mind, what's the kasha? The kasha is based on a very interesting premise, which you alluded to before, which is we go by the subjective case. It has to be that this case is susceptible to machniso l'kiyum. So it says the more fine. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, both the ones that you go to the market and the ones that you keep, they can both be preserved. You dry them, preserve them. But they're asking Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, the first onions, the small bulbs, which you replant to get the big onions, they're not made l'kiyum. They are not going to be made l'kiyum. If those are not going to be nichlas l'kiyum, how can you possibly have to be chayiv and pay on them? So we see clearly the Gemara is saying that we look at the individual issue, the individual case at hand, not at the sum total of onions. That's Gemara's Havamina. That's Gemara's first blush with the Gemara saying. The Gemara, of course, rejects this. Says the Gemara, no. Says the Gemara, Ma'ovid Rabbi Yossi, he says even the small bulbs, they're complete, they're fine vegetables. All they're lacking is to dry them, but you could dry them. Since it's possible to dry them, that's why they're chayiv and peah. Okay, so we're not as subjective, we are at least slightly objective by saying that all the onions are chayiv and peah, even though that you're going to eat immediately and not are going to store because they could have been dried and stored.
Even if they're not going to be, they could be used for something else. They could be planted and new onions could go from that. So,
but if all you did was that, then they would be exempt from peah. Because it has to be eating purposes, not for planting purposes.
now, did you get something that's edible from these small onions?
Yeah, sure you did. You got the big onions.
Yeah. But that's not reason for the small onions to be planted.
No, that wouldn't help. Because then we'd just be mechayim and pay the big onions. Chiddush, the small onions are somewhat edible, and therefore you're mechayim them and pay. Okay, says the Gemara. Tani, we learned leket kitzircha. Leket. Who remembers what leket is? What is the can you give me it to me in English?
Stuff that you take off the trees, the fruit that you take off.
No.
The stuff that falls off the trees.
Falls off out of your hand, right? So leket is stalks which fall out of your hand. Tani, we learned leket kitzircha. What leket do you have to leave for an ani? Leket from harvesting. Lo leket kituf, if you're just plucking stalks of grain out of the ground, then you don't have to leave any. And one of them falls out of your hand, you can pick it up. You don't have to leave it there. It's only if you're harvesting, not plucking. Okay, says the Gemara. Rabbi Zira and Rabbi Chia both said b'shem b'yochar hamelakit shiboim las the soso. Even if you're plucking these grains in order to use in your dough, they used to put like whole kernels of grain in the dough. If you got breadsmith bread, you'll still see that. The little kernels of grain sometimes, or sunflower seeds, or other stuff they put in the bread, right? It's a multi-grain bread. So let's say you're plucking grain in order to put it even in your dough. Afilu kosher. Now here kosher is the opposite of the normal meaning of kosher. Kosher means even a small amount. It means even a large amount. Potter min hapeh, it's exempt from peah, because this is not a harvest. You're plucking. If you're doing this plucking by a scythe, it's still, since it's not part of the harvest. What? So you ask why it's plucking?
Right.
Because he's doing it he's doing it to use the whole kernels as either to pop them into his mouth on the spot, or he's doing it in order to put a few whole kernels in his dough. He's not doing it as a major harvest. Okay. But the chiddush is, even though it's not kalachayad, even though it's a mago, but since his purpose is not the major harvest, so therefore it's okay. So it says the Gemara, Rabbi Yisrael said, Busha shiur. This is only if you didn't do your whole field this way. If you did this whole field this way, obviously you're just a cheat, right? Because you're doing it, you're doing your whole field that fashion, right? So you're looking for a loophole. Vatani asked Gemara, what about the fine price? You had 5 grapevines, who both you're harvesting them, but not for the purpose of a bona fide harvest, but rather for the purpose of eating individual grapes. So basically, you're taking them into your house like individual grapes in order to eat them. Parrot, you don't have to eat parrot, the stuff you forget, you forget, orla, and it's even exempt from the 3-year period. You can eat within the 3 years. It's exempt from the 4th-year redemption process. The chaybolos, you have to leave it on the pay on the tree. So that's a kasha, because here we see it's chayv and it's exempt from it's putter from peret, even though you seem to be harvesting the whole thing, right? You're harvesting a full harvest. So it's more. What?
He doesn't say orlo. He says
minapayim, which makes more sense. He takes out orlo. Because it doesn't make sense to leave, because we know our law is also no matter what. So pay is a very good thing. But in any event, so the kasha is here he harvested his whole thing. Lock, stock, and barrel, yet he's exempt from pay or exempt from leked. Well, how could you say such a thing? So Rabbi said, it depends. The wheat, which he was plucking out, there, it was complete, it was fully ripe. And therefore, in order to be exempt from payah, you can't pluck the whole thing. You can't make it look like a loophole. Kam shein was by the grapes, so they weren't completely ripe. But since they weren't completely ripe, even if you pluck out all of them for eating on an ad hoc basis, if it's not a bona fide harvest, you're exempt from leked and so on and so forth. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yisrael said, "If you take a come Gemuras, you can say both the prices are talking about where the fruit is already complete, or can come Gemuras, or even if both can be talking about where it's incomplete. In other words, they're not fully ripe. That's not the factor which causes the distinction here. Rather, kan here kshabikesh lochlan anovim. It depends. If you wanted to eat them as grapes, then you're exempt from leked shichla and peah, as long as you're collecting on a kituf basis. Hacha, where you chayiv, even if it's a kituf basis, kshabikesh lasos yayin. When you want to make wine, which is a dover miskaye, there you have to give peah. Says the Gemara, or land leked, etc. What? I know the difference here is not kiyum. I shouldn't have. I probably was led you astray. What I meant was the difference is whether it's a bona fide harvest or not. Bona fide harvest being defined as for wine. This case, our case of the grain, learns from the case of wine. The case of wine learns from our case. Our case learns in this case that we can also draw the economy. Even when you harvest your whole field as kituf, but you don't do it in order to make bread. You do it in order to lasos melilos, to make pop grains. To put in your mouth, then you're exempt from leked. Just like over there. And from there we learned from there. That's even if you didn't leave anything over. In that case, learns from our case, shim bikesh lasos and yayin, that even if you want to make a wine, which is a real harvest, as long as you have something over in your field, so it's okay. Again, the two elements which exempt you from leked, shichla, and peah are if A, You did the whole thing, but you did it on an ad hoc basis for popping grapes or for popping grain. Or B, you did it as a bona fide harvest, so you didn't do your whole field. And that means it's not a real harvest, it's just like a quick way of getting food. And therefore not chayav leker shulchan peah.
Scenario A, that's taking a big chance. I mean, that's opening up.
All these are Pandora boxes. That's right. Okay. Hameda v'chulei. Somebody who thins out his vineyard is chayav in 2 payos. Tan Rabbi Yehuda is a medvar. When is that true? Made l'shuk by professional thinning. Because now you're thinning in order to send a whole bunch of grapes or wine to the marketplace intentionally. So therefore, it's 2 stages, which are commercially viable. I've made a bias, but if you're doing the first madel just for your own purposes at home, it's a homegrown type of thinning. It's not going to be a separate stage, and you can give whatever you have at the end on the whole thing. Amar Rabbi Zira. Rabbi Zira said, this is also only true when originally you grew a thicket in your vineyard. You grew it very thick in order to have this 2-stage harvest, the thinning harvest and then the ultimate harvest. But he didn't have this mind to begin with. Not if he's doing it for his own house. Even if he's doing it for market, he can give from that which is left over and everything, because it wasn't a formal staggered harvest. It was one harvest, which happened to have required thinning ahead of time. Okay, I believe this is something one of you asked before. Not sure which one of you. But you see here clearly that there is a time frame over which a staggered harvest can be considered to be one harvest. It's critical that he had the intent to dafka do it as 2 separate stages. Only then is he chayiv in 2 payos. Okay? Says Gemara, now these are mother onions. Mother onions are these huge mama onions, we would say. Yeah, the mother of all onions. So that they're big and they produce a lot of onion seed. Now, I don't know, maybe, maybe it's not onion seed, maybe maybe each shoot which comes out of an onion can grow a whole onion plant. So these produce many onion shoots. You ever leave an onion around and it gets green shoots, right? So maybe each shoot can produce, if you replanted an onion plant. What do I know? But in any event, these are thick mother onions which are meant to reproduce many, many bulbs. Chayav is a peah, the chayav peah. Because you eat them, Rabbi Yossi Poteri exempts them from peah. We'll see what I think more. If you have patches of onion between your vegetables, Rabbi Yossi Peah mikolachas, Rabbi Yossi says you can pay from each one. The Chacham Armim, Beyachar will call from one patch on all the rest of the patches. Rav Amar Purgada. A mother onion is called a Purgada, which means one which can be reused over and over. It has both Mishnayos together in that one. So you go back, get to Gemara and go back again. Okay? So again, you found it? Rav Amar Rav Amar Purgada and Shmuel Amar Tumachta. Rabbi Yaakov Rav Moshe Rechina said, Lom Rabbi Yossi L'Mshum Hefker. The reason Rabbi Yossi exempted these mother onions from payos because they're hefker. People don't care to assert ownership on them. Okay? So it says the Gemara, no. Rabbi Abun Barchia Boikum Rabbi Mona. Rabbi Abun Barchia asks Rabbi Mona, if that's the case, what's Rabbanon's logic? The hefker chayiv b'peah. Rabbanon who say that the emos are chayiv, they hold that hefker is chayiv and peah, cannot be. Amarle, so he said, B'zocha me'en achas achas. Maybe it's about a case according to Rabbanon where he acquired them. He acquired the mother onions, therefore he's chayiv and peah. Says Gemara, no, that's not the pshat. I'll bring you a proof from a brisa. For a time we learn a brisa, Chachamim responded in this brisa to Rabbi Yossi by saying, even though he doesn't care to keep them when he has plenty of onions, what he cares to keep them when he has very few onions. Miskaimos, he cares to keep them. What parameter is that evoke? The parameter of what? Preservation. So we see that they were saying Rabbi Yossi must have said, you don't preserve Emos Shabbat Solim. Leave them out in the field. They're not things that you bring into your house in order to store. So the Rabban responded and said, no, sometimes you do. If you have a lot of onions, you're right, you just leave the mother onions out of the field. But if you onions, you bring them in and you preserve them to use as food as well. So it's heavy lace, timer. It must be that there's no other reason except the low mishum, heavy lace time is low. There's no other reason to exempt them or to be mechayiv them for a payas case, maybe except for mishum machnisul l'kiyum. No, it's machlokas rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi is not whether they're hefker or not, but whether it's machnisul l'kiyum. Right? It says you never take the mother onions in and store them. Rabbi Yossi says you do. Okay, halacha daled. Ha'achim shecholku. Now, remember, in Jewish law, states are considered to be units. So, achim shecholku, brothers who divide up their deceased father's estate. Nosim shnei payos, they give 2 payos, because now they're separate. Chazon ishtat, what happens if they change their mind and decide to put the estate back together again? Even after they divvied it up, they put it back together again. Nosim payachas are considered to be 1 payo. Shnaim shlochos se'ilan. It's true, by the way, of any payo, any partners. I shouldn't say it's just true about brothers.
Even though the field is the same field, it's not separated, but if they split it up?
Right. Depends what they did. Says Mar Shnaim Shlochu Seilon, 2 people took a tree, even 1 tree. Nostim Peah Achas. Then if they took it as partners, they give 1 payout. However, Zetzfon of Zed Romo. If this guy bought the north side of the tree and the other guy bought the south side of the tree, then I say payout, each one is give payout from his side of the tree. Okay, now comes the interesting case. They harvested half the field together as partners. Then they split. From the second half they harvested as antagonists, right? They split up their relationship. In that case, Eino marfish mishalo. You're not allowed to set Peah up from your field on his, not even on the tchila, on that which you were partners, which we saw earlier in the Masechta. Even though on the first half you were still partners. And on that you should be able to give a common Peah. You're not allowed to because it's a gzera. Because at the end you're no longer partners. You have to give separate Peah on the second half of the field. So therefore even on the first half of the field, make you give separate Peah. Okay? Says.
So how many portions are there?
How many what? Oh, each one gives their own, so that's 2 altogether. Just 2. Okay. You don't. The other one would be 3. No, you don't have to give 3. You just give 2. Okay. Says the Gemara, Chosav nishtatfu, the Kotzru. What happens if then they became partners again? And then they harvested. Marfish mishalosh basav shabcheverosh basav. So they on that which they all, even though all's well that ends well, it doesn't work retroactively. On the part which they were partners, the last part they can give 1 part common payout. But on the part which they were not partners, on that they cannot give a common payout. It doesn't work retroactively. Okay? In that case, it's 4. Maybe it didn't interrupt. Yeah, so it's 3, right? 2 and then 1. Yeah, okay. Says said now a very interesting case. And the rest of the cases of the evening are similar. I need a piece of paper. So that's your piece of paper? Okay, this is the case. Here's a field. Can you see, Dr. Smith? You have a field over here. Okay, they were originally partners on the whole field. Okay, they decided to split. They were originally partners on half a field. They were partners on this. They harvested half of this half. They harvested this half over here. The harvest. Then they bought this half of the field, and then they became partners subsequently on this part of the field. Now at the beginning, this is first they were partners on this half, then they harvested this half, then they bought this half, now they harvested this, and then they harvested. Step number 4 is that they harvested this section. Now, says the Gemara, we'll see it inside in a minute, but you can take Peah from this part, on this part, and on this part, because they were partners in they were partners in this when they were partners here, and they're partners on this when they're partners here, right? You can take Peah from this on this, and take Peah from that on that, but you cannot take Peah from this on that, because they were never partners in this part, in the, let's call it the east, the west half, when they're partners in the east half. Okay? Right. So let me just say that for the microphone to make it clear, you can take, they're partners in the eastern half. The west in the eastern half, and then they split up. They harvested half of the eastern half. Only then they become partners on the western half. Then they harvested the western half and the middle part. They had the western part of the eastern half. So then they can take Peah from the middle, meaning the western part of the eastern half, on the western half and on the eastern half. They can take Peah from the eastern part of the eastern half on the western part of the eastern half, and from the western half on the western part of the eastern half, but they cannot take Peah from either of the sides on each other, from the west side on the eastern part of the eastern half, or from the eastern half of the eastern half on the west side. Okay?
I can't wait for this to
Says the Gemara.
It's partners where they're
It's partners, yes. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Kitzer chatzit sadeh. You harvested. Now here the first word kitzer means they're partners. They are partners in harvesting half a field. The kitzer chatzit chetzu, and they harvested half of that half. They didn't harvest the second half. Ad shekatzer kula, until they became partners in the whole thing and the rest of it. And marfish min harishon rosh, it should be min haroshim. You can be marfish from the two heads, in other words, from the two sides, and flame on the middle. Umina, from the middle, ala roshim on the two sides. Aval eno marfish min haroshim ala roshim, but you can't take from one side on the other side. Rabbi Shimon Levi said a similar idea with a different case. You're one guy. You have one field. But it's growing, it's maturing at different rates. Chatzia via shlish, so the eastern half grew a third, which is the shiur that's grown in order to be suitable to harvest. The chetzi lo shlish, but the western half had not yet gotten to a third of its growth. So you harvested half of the part which became mature, left half, and before you got around to harvesting the second half, the other side of the field became mature as well. Okay? Again, you weren't able to harvest the other half of the first half, until the rest of it grew into the third as well. So you have to the same halacha. You can take from since the middle part of the field was extant, at the time that both of the sides, each one of the sides, got to a third, so therefore marvish min haroshim and tzayim, he marvish from the either side on the middle, min tzayim ala roshim, and from the middle on either side, veino marvish min haroshim, roshim can't be marvish from one side, one extreme, on the other extreme. We'll stop here for this evening.
What was this last minute that we were saying?
Same case as the partners. Except instead of partners, we're talking about whether it's mature. Same idea. This got mature first, this half, and then you harvest it. Right. Okay.
Wednesday night you're not going to be here.
Right. Wednesday and Thursday. Going to learn tonight. tomorrow night, and next Monday, and then after Shavuos regular schedule.
Are we on schedule?
If we're behind, we're a block behind. We're not far.